Welcome to Funnel This, the podcast where fintech marketers and founders learn what really works when it comes to brand building and driving demand.
It's hosted by me, Sally Baker. I'm the founder of fintech marketing agency Wondrous.
Follow the podcast on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Just search Funnel This.
Great content has the power to grab attention, build trust, and drive action, but only if it is well designed, you've got the right message, and you've written the right brief. Today I'm joined by Ben and Andy, and we're going to be talking about some simple things that B2B tech marketers can do to get a better performance from their content. So first of all, Andy, can you tell me some of the biggest mistakes that you see in other people's content design?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one right off the top of my head is too much content. The biggest thing is people just want to get everything they want to say on the first slide or in whatever image they're putting in. And they don't stop to think maybe, okay, what is the key thing that I want to get across here? Ultimately, if somebody's scrolling down their feed and all they see is a wall of text, you have like 0.6 seconds to grab somebody's attention when they see your piece of content. And if it is just something that they can't decipher straight away, they're not going to interact with it. They're going to scroll straight past.
The main problem with bad content is too much of it. Everyone always wants to just put far too much content on whatever it is they're designing.
And what's the impact of having too much content?
It just makes it really difficult for the customer, client to take in the information.
I guess it can sometimes look off-putting. It's just not something that you want to read. If the content looks too much, you just less likely to want to read.
You just skip past it and look at what the next competitor's doing.
Have you got anything else to say on impact of poor design on marketing performance?
Yeah, I think one of the key things you can notice and that can be measured quite easily is you can see a lot of time where content doesn't have a clear call to action of what you want somebody to do after interacting with it, that the click-through rate or the interaction rate will be a lot lower. Just because I know it sounds a little bit mean, but people don't really want to have to think a lot of the time, especially when they're scrolling on their phones. They want to be able to digest your content and know what to do next. If you're not leaving them that breadcrumb trail of like a clear call to action, go to our website, download the ebook, listen to our podcast, they're going to go away from that and they're just going to scroll on to the next thing because you haven't put that thought into their head of where to go next.
Yeah, and even as a marketer, it can be easy sometimes if you're really busy just to forget those simple things. So I guess it could be helpful perhaps to have a checklist when you're either if you're putting something together yourself or you're giving that brief onto a designer or an agency. What is my key message? What do I want people to do when they see this? Just to make sure that all that content is there.
Another mistake that marketers make is just following trends too quickly. Yes, it's great to be on trend and following what's going on, but you may find that you're following something that's not relevant to your audience. Just because someone's doing something amazing doesn't mean it'll work for your customers. So
keep an eye on trends, but choose the right
Yes.
ones. How much of an impact do you think design has on readability?
Massively. The first thing that I would always think about when I look at any piece of content that's going out on a screen or on a social or anything like that is, first of all, is contrast. Is it easy and legible to look at what you want people to see straight away and for them to be able to read it without having to look and think, what exactly does that say? And then if you're pulling out your key points, your stats, everything like that, if you've got it all in one colour, people aren't going to know what your hierarchy is, where you want them to look. The best design will always not only look good, it will direct the user where you want them to go and what piece of information you want them to take.
People in this day and age just want to take information in quick, so the easier it is for them to digest, the more chance they will be able to use that knowledge.
Can you think of any examples where perhaps even a small change in the design of something has had a big impact on its performance?
Check your hierarchy. It needs to start with impact, lead through to the message, and then give a clear call to action at the end.
And when you talk about a hierarchy, obviously I know what you mean, but from like a visual perspective, what does that actually mean?
Either starting off with a bigger font, a bolder font, a leading headline, or the stronger message just at the top.
Yeah, so if you've got lots of messages and they're all at a similar size, all in the same colour, it's going to be hard to work out which is the lead message. And
Yes.
Thinking that people are only going to take perhaps one thing away from a piece of content, you've got to make sure the hierarchy is right so that they walk away with the information you want them to take away from it.
In the order you want them to take it away.
You talked about contrast and colour.
Yes.
Thinking about accessibility, again, if you're trying to design something yourself and perhaps you don't have a design background, that might be something that you could overlook. So with accessibility in mind, what guidance could you give on choice of colour?
So accessibility, contrast-wise, is a huge thing. One of the best things to do really is when you're laying your content out, you can start with just a dark background and white text, and then you can make sure that everything is legible, and then you can start adding your brand colours in and stuff afterwards. If you start with a dark tone and a light tone first as just your two base colours, you can work from there, and that will guarantee that you have that contrast ready to go. If you're concerned accessibility-wise, there are a lot of tools online that you can use to judge accessibility, and it will give you a percentage score of where you stand on the accessibility standards. So that way you know that whoever's coming across your content, if they're having a visual impairment or anything like that, it's going to be fine for them to consume as well.
Startup businesses that perhaps have been doing their own design in-house, they might just be thinking about growing their marketing team, perhaps they've used freelance designers. What do you think is the risk of continuing with that model as the business scales and as you put more content out?
The main risk is that you're probably going to see more inconsistencies in what you're putting out there. If you've got a sole freelancer, that's great. They'll probably know your brand. As soon as you start expanding that maybe out to people either in your team that might be doing bits themselves or other freelancers, when you might start seeing things coming back that aren't quite looking the same.
Say, for example, your brand normally does images cut off from the left. You could send that to a designer. They don't necessarily know that. They might have your image coming in from the right. It's still going to look great because that's how the content works. They've designed it to that spec.
Yeah.
But the consumer is not going to look at that and necessarily think of your brand straight away, and you're diluting your impact.
Yeah, and I guess it's a number of those things all add up to become sort of a bigger problem, and it's very subconscious, isn't it, for the user, I guess. But as you say, making sure that things are consistent every time something goes out ultimately is going to build up that recognition for your brand. It is the case, isn't it, that some people out there might think, well, I'm pretty tech savvy, I can easily knock this up myself, and people do that. What is the risk when people are trying to do things themselves? What is it that they're likely perhaps to get wrong, or what's the impact?
When people are doing these things themselves, the main impact is, as it's not their only job, they will sort of just squeeze it in between other things, and this is where things will slip through the net, won't get noticed, and as time goes on, these things will change over and over again. And again, all down to consistency. Before you know it, it can have moved on to something totally different.
If you're working from files within a Canva or a template or anything like that, it's really easy to think, I'll just use the most recent one.
Yeah.
Click and make a copy. And you do that 5 times, that's 5 little pieces of something that's moved 1 pixel over, or that's 5 different shades of that colour that's changed by 10% or something, and that's going to add up over time, and you're not going to notice it from copy to copy. And then by the time you look back at your feed and you look at it in a grid, it's very easy to look from the one up there and the one down there and say, okay, those are a little bit different.
And what do you think is the impact of having things going out that aren't consistent?
The main thing is what your customers see and how they perceive you. Will you lose your professional edge? Will they think, what's happening to this brand? Will it just be as simple as they think, I don't like what these guys are putting out anymore?
It's not just your logo that is your brand. Everything you put out there is what consumers will think about, and that is your brand. So you have to make sure that everything is a representation of what you want people to think about.
Are there any sort of typical things that you tend to see become inconsistent that a brand might be putting out? Is it that the more social posts they do, the more inconsistent they get, or what type of things tend to become inconsistent?
Normally, things that become inconsistent are just things like font sizes, messages, the way they're written or delivered, colours. Again, I know it's great to have an agency do all the work for you, but that's not necessarily feasible all the time. So if you are doing bits yourself, it's always worth investing in some form of software that can make this easier for you or anyone else that you might have try to do this alongside an agency. If you work with an agency that's specific to your sector, they'll be seeing what's going on day in, day out, so they don't need so much ideation time,
I guess they might
time,
be more aware of what the competition are doing and that sort of
thing. The trends and what's going on. So that can be both cost effective and time effective.
What would you say are the benefits to outsourcing your design to an agency?
Some of the key benefits of outsourcing to an agency will be things like they will get to know your brand inside and out. They will look at it more than just what your colours are, what you're putting out there. They will look at how you want to speak to people, all the details behind the scenes, all that. The other side is the time investment you have to put in to do these things yourself. That time could be spent much better focusing on your business or other areas of the business.
I guess an agency can probably do it quicker than you might do it, and better as well.
Again, yeah, when it comes to the actual design itself, the software is out there for people to do these bits themselves, but you've also got to put the time in to learn it, know when things aren't going right, when things are going right, whether you're putting out files that aren't high res enough, are using images that are copyrighted, all these things that could end up coming back and costing you in the long run.
Yeah, and we have seen that happen to people, haven't we?
Yeah.
Making your content work harder. That's, let's face it, everyone is time short, and if we can get the absolute most out of one piece of content, then that is only going to save us time. So what tips can you give for B2B tech marketers to get more out of a piece of content? So let's say it's a white paper. How might they also use that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the kind of content that is produced, especially in the fintech sector, we have all these amazing white papers and studies coming out, and they're great, and you can download the PDF, you can look through them, amazing. But we're kind of stopping short there of doing everything that we can with it, because you've got 10 pages, each with a title. I can look at that and say, okay, there's 10 slides of a carousel that you can put on LinkedIn. And this kind of goes back to my point earlier that some people might think, well, how would that work because of all this content on the page? You don't have to put all the content on there. Take the headers and whatever the imagery is of that page, put that on there, and it will give everybody a snapshot of what that is about. You're not kind of losing out on reads of your white paper because you're recycling the headers into the carousel. You're kind of breadcrumbing them to see, I want to read what the rest of this content is as well. So there's a double benefit really of that. And then another thing you can do is, let's say you've got like a great study or a great white paper, or even just like a one pager or something like that. Consider how you're going to break the content down before we even go into the design. So maybe you would look at it naturally as like a 2-page thing. Could it actually be an infographic instead? And then when it's an infographic set into stages, you can break that down into 5 different posts throughout the month, because you can pull apart your graphics, pull apart your design, and you can get loads of pieces of content out of that. So maybe just also consider it before we get into the design phase as well.
Yeah, and I think it's worth remembering that different people will consume information in different ways. So it might be that somebody is looking for an in-depth piece of information on a particular topic, but let's say they're just out and about and they're scrolling on LinkedIn and they come across something, they might not have the time to sit and read it there and then. So that's where things like your carousels or an infographic can come in really handy, because they can get the, let's say, summary of the topic and then know that they can go and download it later to look at. One thing that we do for most of our clients, if they film, let's say, a long piece of video content, perhaps it's 20, 30 minutes long, they will absolutely use that full video perhaps on their website, but also they will look to cut that down and create shorter snippets, exactly like we will do with this video, that can then be shared on LinkedIn over a number of weeks. Because again, we know that if you're on LinkedIn, you probably haven't got time to sit and watch a half-an-hour video, but you have got time perhaps to sit and watch a 30, 45-second long video. So that can really keep that content going over a number of weeks, and it could sit on the website as well as blog pages and so on. So that's a number of ways that you can reuse video. Have you got any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's kind of not necessarily thinking of content as like a piece of video or a white paper. It's just content, and it can be broken up and used in multiple different ways. What you can do with a white paper in terms of breaking that up and getting content out of it for a month, you can do with a video, like you just said. We can break it down to snippets. There's also options like you can, if it's an explainer video with like a infographic or like moving graphics within it, we could pull those apart, turn them into static visuals. You could implement them on as like small little kind of icons or something on your content throughout that month as a callback to that video, kind of implementing like a theme for the month or something like that. So when you look at a finished piece of work, you don't necessarily have to kind of be like, okay, that's done, forget about it now. There's still loads that we can do with it.
And I guess you could even be going back to look at content that you've used maybe over the last year. So it doesn't have to be right from now on, this is what we're going to do with our content. You could go back and get more out of the content that you've already got. Any other tips on how you can use content or repurpose content?
Yeah, I mean, everything we're talking about is kind of just how to get people interested and how to kind of catch their eye on the feed. And when you think about a piece of content, like, don't even just think about the content. We can drop like a teaser beforehand of a bit of behind the scenes of the work going on. Maybe you're setting up the filming. Maybe you're doing your ideation board with like the group of your marketing team or something like that. That's interesting content. It's going to get people thinking, what are they doing next? And then you can say, coming in a week, coming in 2 weeks. And then you're just going to grab a few more eyes over the next week, next 2 weeks, waiting for that content drop.
It does add a human element, I think, doesn't it, to the brand, brings it to life much more to show behind the scenes. And I think people do really like to see that sort of content.
Yeah, I think people will always like to see people. They like to interact with people more so than brands, I think, in this day and age. I think especially if you can have that personable edge behind the scenes things, even to your content, like even maybe you can look at your wording and bring it a little bit more personable, a little bit more informal on your content. That will kind of, I think, have a big impact on people engaging with it.
Andy, do you think that beautiful design always equals effective design?
Absolutely not. I think design, and design for social especially, is a very fine line. It's okay if you've got a great piece of work, maybe it is the best looking graphic you've ever designed in your life. If it's not accomplishing your goal that you set out for that piece of content beforehand, then it's not great design, because every design should have a function and a purpose. And whilst it's looking good, if you've got so much detail on it that people can't make out your call to action, they can't see the stats, they can't see perhaps the locations that you've put on your world map that you've designed so beautifully, then it's not going to accomplish the goal that you set out for it beforehand.
And I guess a lot of that comes back to writing a good brief for the designer, doesn't it? Because it's not really enough just to provide, here is the content for this report or white paper or ebook. Really, that designer is going to need to understand what's the key thing that you want people to take away from this document. Who is it that the document is talking to? What do you want them to do as a result of seeing this piece of content?
Yeah, so I think a way that a lot of designers will work when you look at a brief, or at least the way that I work, is you can look at the brief and then say, okay, this is targeted at a person. It's designed to get a reaction from this person. And you put yourself then in that person's shoes and think, if I was looking at this content, how am I going to interact with it? How am I going to work with it? And then you take from that, you can say, okay, well, I know that the client wants to specify this piece of CTA or this piece of statistic or something like that. How do I make that stand out to me if I was looking at it? If you just provide them with a block of content, the designer will go with it and they'll do their very best to do what you want and kind of what they think you want. But when you get the other end of it, it might not be what you want specifically. It might not do the exact action you're looking for the user to do. Because a lot of the time the designer will look at your content and they'll pull out the bits that they think they can visualize really well. That's great. If you're working with a specific report or something statistic based, you might be looking to kind of stress different areas.
Yeah. And again, I guess just to wrap up on that point, so the content could be great, the design could be great, but you need the brief to match it.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to start from a good foundation, ultimately. If you can get your brief to the point where like you can look at your brief and say, okay, I can kind of see this just by looking at it. I can imagine the hierarchy of my content, then you're already 50% of the way there.
Design doesn't have to be beautiful. Like,
That's an interesting point of view.
From a designer's perspective, yes, I want everything to look amazing and great. But if you're a startup, it's better to be getting stuff out there than not doing anything. The amount of times we've had people that are starting a new brand and they want a logo and they get to the point where it's like, oh, is that yellow quite right? Is this not quite right? When they should really just be getting something out there, and that can all be tweaked as we go along. So no, it doesn't have to be beautiful. It has to look good, professional, or what your market expects to see, but beautiful, no.
Okay. I think that's really refreshing, actually, because I would guess that there are other agencies out there and clients that do think that as a startup, you've got to have all of these things in place before we can put anything out. And like you say, that's not the case, really, is it? You just need to start sharing content as early as you can.
I think if you're a startup and you want to get in front of people, you need to just start getting in front of people. You can tighten things up, get things neater and better as you go, but your key thing is just get something out there in front of people.
Another myth that I'd like to talk to you about, maybe it's not a myth, I don't know, we'll find out, Andy, but designing for a B2B audience, do you think that should always have a more formal edge, let's say, to in comparison to if you were designing for a B2C brand?
I think there's a place for everything. And at the moment, I do think there's a little bit maybe of a misconception that because you're B2B, you need to be really serious. because obviously of the kind of modernisation of brand guidelines and things like that at the moment, everybody kind of thinks, oh, to stick to my brand, I need to be really formal.
Obviously, there's so many businesses in a crowded market sharing content all the time. You said that there's pressure on people to be visually present all of the time. Have you got any ideas or tips on how people can stand out when the market is already so crowded?
It's a difficult one now. And you don't necessarily have to stand out. You just need to look as good as your competitors. Yes, if you can come up with clever ways that you are totally different, that is brilliant. But if you are doing things well and it's going well, just continue with the formula.
Have you got any views on how important it is to look at what your competition are doing? Do you think you should be doing that? You shouldn't be doing that?
If you use an agency, it's a good thing for them to be doing, so they know what's out there, because you don't want them replicating things that are already happened and stuff like that. But as a business owner yourself, it can send you down a warren of, am I as good as these guys? Should I be doing this? Shouldn't I be doing this? So I think it's not really the best thing you should be doing yourself.
There's a time and place for it and the right people
Yes.
to be doing it for you. What other tips could you give to B2B marketers to perhaps expand their reach or come up with new ways of sharing content?
We've done it a lot with white papers, which are written by multiple companies, and then that gives everyone lots of assets then to go and push forward.
And I guess also it's going to amplify the reach of that content, isn't it? Because it's not only your brand sharing it, but it's also all the contributors' brands as well.
Yeah, and people that may be following them, but not necessarily yourself.
Thinking about the type of work that we've done for some of our clients in the past, what would you say is one of the best performing things that we've done or that clients could be doing?
One of the best performing things that we've done is probably personalisation of work.
Okay.
Not putting out generic content to everyone. If you can personalise it to audiences where people are viewing your content, that always gets much better engagement or returns.
So an example of that might be, for example, the brand could be looking at who is visiting and engaging with their content on their website if they've got tools that allow them to do that. And then they're taking a piece of content that's already been created and they're sending that out again to those companies, but with a level of personalisation added.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And how much of that document should be personalised, do you think, or how much do we personalise it for people?
A lot of the time it'll just be top level. If you're doing a brochure, it might be the front cover, the introduction, and then the call to action at the end. And that's all. Other examples, it could be a lot more all the way through, depending on how bespoke it needs to be for that person to engage with it.
Yeah. And that obviously links back to when we were talking about how you can repurpose content. So I guess, you've got a piece of content that you might create into other assets, but you could also take a piece of content and personalise it to specific people that you want to see that content and that you know are engaging with you already. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for listening.
Great advice. Thanks very much, Andy.
It's okay.
Thanks for listening to Funnel This. Follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed it, do share with someone else who might find it useful too. See you next time.